1953 in Hungary is communist, and a puppet state of the USSR, along with all of these nations. Eastern Europe had been like this since the end of the Second World War, but 1953 was an important year since it saw Joseph Stalin die. With Stalin's iron-fisted rule now over, there was an opportunity to change tack for communist states like Hungary. Hungary was told by Moscow to replace its current Prime Minister Martas Rakosi with someone a bit less Stalin-y. A man called Imre Nagy, a previously purged critic of Stalinism, was selected to take over and begin reforms to make Hungary, less Stalin-y. Rakosi had been a harsh ruler and was responsible for over 100,000 people being imprisoned and many hundreds being shot. The most important of these victims was a man called Laszlo Rojk, who had purged a fair few people himself. Nagy attempted to make some economic reforms, but Rakosi managed to convince the USSR's new leader, Nikita Khrushchev, that Nagy wasn't reliable, and so Nagy was removed in 1955. Rakosi was now back in charge, but he was deeply unpopular with the people of Hungary, mostly because of the whole purging thing. He was also a staunch opponent of Yugoslavia and its leader, Josip Broz Tito. Yugoslavia had broken off relations with the USSR in 1948 and left Cominform, an international network of communist nations, and Khrushchev was looking to bring Yugoslavia back into the fold. Thus, having a man in charge of Hungary who shot people for being Titoists wasn't a good look for them. In mid-1956, Rakosi was removed from office by the Soviets and replaced by Ernő Gerő, who was also a fierce Stalinist who hated any idea of reform. For Gerő, ties with Yugoslavia were the least of his problems, since students across the country began to form independent groups looking for change. On the 23rd of October, a major protest broke out in Budapest, whose organisers made several demands. They wanted economic and democratic reforms, the return of Nagy's prime minister, and for Soviet troops to leave the country. Gerő banned this demonstration but was worried about looking weak, and so he allowed the protest to go ahead, until they said things he didn't like, and so he banned them again, and when they didn't disperse, Soviet soldiers fired upon the crowds. To stop the protests in their tracks, the Hungarian Communist Party opted to bring back Nagy to show that they were listening. It's important to remember that the Hungarians couldn't act quickly since they needed permission from Moscow before taking any sort of drastic action. Discussions between Hungary and the USSR on what to do were carried out by János Kadar on the Hungarian side and Anastas Mikoyan on behalf of the Soviets. Kadar urged restraint at first, since he felt that not all of those protesting were simply trying to overthrow the government. In the end, Moscow agreed to negotiate with the protesters. In the hopes of ending the protest, Nagy promised to dissolve the secret police and that Soviet troops would leave the capital. This did sweet nothing, and so Nagy desperately promised to end one-party rule, sort of, and to restore Hungarian democracy, sort of. Nagy was still a communist through and through, though. He simply felt that a less centralised and freer form of communism was a better option. He also promised Hungarian independence by demanding that Soviet troops leave Hungary altogether and that Hungary would leave the newly formed Warsaw Pact, a defensive communist alliance and the USSR's answer to NATO. For the USSR, the abandonment of one-party rule was too much, and on November the 3rd it ordered troops to the Hungarian border. In response, Nagy declared that Hungary was no longer a member of the Warsaw Pact and wanted to be considered a neutral state, like Yugoslavia. Negotiations between Hungary and the USSR broke down, and on November the 4th Soviet forces crossed into Hungary to supplement the troops already there. Nagy urged the people of Hungary to resist, which they did, taking for their symbol the Hungarian flag but with the communist symbol cut out. Soviet troops attacked Budapest, but despite their advantages, Hungarian resistance was extremely fierce, and thus advances into the city were slow. Kadar was soon appointed as the new head of government and urged his fellow countrymen and all Hungarian soldiers to side with the USSR and to restore order. None did. Most of Budapest was captured on the 4th, and the Hungarian Revolution was over. In the end, roughly 2,500 Hungarians were killed and about 700 Soviet soldiers with them, the vast majority in Budapest. Soon afterwards, Nagy was arrested and sent to Romania. The Soviets and Kadar restored order over the following months, and over 20,000 people were arrested and over 200,000 people fled the country. Strict laws were enacted which handed out the death penalty for anyone who called for strikes, but the aftermath didn't really see any particularly brutal repressions. Nagy was returned to Hungary, and in 1958 he was found guilty of fomenting counter-revolution and executed. I hope you enjoyed this episode and thank you for watching, and a special thanks to James Bisonet, Azarka Flash, Henry Rabban, Winston Kaywood, Adam Harvey and Sky Chappell.